Scott Myers.
Mika Bell. Meg Zalatel.
Christopher Constant.
Anna Brawley.
We have from the administration, Ona Browse, OMB Director, and Chief Administrative Officer Bill Falsey in the back. On the phone, we have Mr. Johnson.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Martinez.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Salt.
Here, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on the phone? Okay, that sounds like we have everyone together. The purpose of today's work session is to go through the draft packet of amendments that are proffered by members that have been made in advance. It was worth noting that a member has a right to bring an amendment to any legislative program at any time up until the item is adopted. But for members who are newer, there is a practical reality that the later an item comes and the less it has been briefed, the less likely it is to be understood and accepted or adopted by your peers. And so its early work is more likely to be successful. So I just put that out there now. That was the reason why a kind of a deadline was put out there to get amendments to Mr. Farina and have them go through the system so everybody has an opportunity to talk through their proposed amendment. And so we have in the packet, I think, many amendments, 15 amendments, is that right?
18.
16 amendments. I don't know that we have that one yet, but no, it's on the back. Okay, so we have 16 amendments. We have 2 hours. We have some annotation and discussion to have in advance of the discussion of each amendment. So if we are going to take 120 minutes divided by 16, it's approximately 7 minutes minus any time that we talk. We've already wasted 10 minutes, so it's really 6 minutes per amendment, and that includes presentation of the concept and discussion. And so I'm just kind of going to say then, just to be fair, 5 minutes per item. And some may take more, some may take less. We'll just try to hew to the 5-minute mark. Scott.
If we have time today, and I'm waiting for some information. I know Ona's been a little bit busy, but Mark and I will have another one to put forward if we get information that's positive. So I can go over that briefly.
Even if you don't have the written amendment, it's worth speaking about it here today in the flow towards the end. That way it's not coming at us at the last minute. You know, again, George, Mr. Martinez notes that he also will have another amendment. But again, the same advice holds. Please be prepared to speak to it. Also, I asked Ona to be prepared or have someone prepared to speak about the CASA process because we don't necessarily have amendments yet and we don't know how that's going, but there have been a lot of kind of requests for more information. And so I don't know who might be prepared to speak to that. So in the context of the time that we have, hopefully there's at least some time to be able to speak to that, but let's save that for the end. So before we dive deeply into all of this, Meg, do you have anything you want to add before I hand it to Ona? No? Okay, Ona.
Ooh, this one's on. This one's on.
I just resynchronize. So some of them are.
Check.
Thank you for inviting me to this work session to go through these amendments with you. I'd like to go over the timeline that we have in front of us for the next 10 days and also what I hope membership will see as additional opportunity to go through these amendments over the next week. If the administration is interested in pursuing some of the amendments that are presented here, then I would expect conversations with the sponsors to happen over the next week. And we believe that the S version of the budget should be submitted on the regular addendum so that you will see that as posted on Friday. That we have time set with the budget and finance co-chairs at the beginning of next week to coordinate with some Tuesday night process clearance. And if there are any amendments that members would have brought forward if they had some additional information from me, then I am more than happy to entertain conceptual amendments and also continue those conversations moving forward over the next few days. I would also like to offer the consideration that, the budget that was proposed was under the tax cap with a small amount, about $200,000. There was some funding available in the alcohol tax and funding available in the marijuana tax for amendments or additional process through first quarter budget revisions. And I know that membership has a number of amendments they would like to see funded, and we heard some testimony during the public hearings that may have been compelling and seem to be based on the amendment packages. And aside from the funding that is represented right now in the general government budget, there are also some additional non-property tax revenues that could be part of the budget. And specifically, those are the remaining ARPA dollars that have either been returned by some of the previous grantees or some additional funding that is not going to be used by some of the grantees and some municipal entities that won't need the whole amount before they close out their projects. And if willing to entertain, we can incorporate those in order to get further down the funding list. It also helps us move through the appropriation process deadline for ARPA, which is the end of this year. So this would be an efficient way to take care of both of those things with needs that the membership and administration have identified as necessary during the budget process. So there's also the opportunity, and this is a little less attractive for our office, but there are small dollar amounts throughout different accounts and funds within the municipality that are, the funds have either been dormant or they are beyond their service life, and we can close those accounts out. And going through and scrubbing for those dollar amounts may be an opportunity too, both for additional funding, but to clean up some of those accounts that exist. And if the membership is willing to entertain that, then we can contemplate the idea of many small dollar appropriations instead of larger dollar appropriations, what I will call budget litter, and make sure that we get through as many of the funding requests as possible. So if the body is open to that, then we will take that under consideration during the S version.
All right, Ms. Alto.
Thanks. So based on what Ms. Brous just said, I think as you speak to your amendment, you should indicate if you're seeking one-time or actual operational funding, meaning you would want it to go into the continuation version of the budget, because I think that would guide Ms. Brous into whether or not she can find, do you say budget blurg? Oh, budget litter. Budget litter that might be able to effectuate your amendment, or the ARPA funds or something. So, and it wasn't on the amendment sheets. Thank you.
All right, so the next part of the process we will do is we're just going to kind of one at a time walk our way through each of these, again, respecting time limitation. One note from a procedural perspective, the purpose of this meeting is not to entertain debates on the items. And so questions for clarification are valid. It's kind of hard to sort between what is debate and what is inquiry for informational purposes, and we'll do our very best. So any member who feels like we're verging into debate is, of course, has a right to speak up, point of order, hey, feels like we're crossing a line here. But again, the intent today is not to debate these items. It is informational only. So with that caveat, and I didn't put this packet together, so I have a couple right at the front. It wasn't meant to be that I took first, but I do have a couple. And so and the packet, Mr. Farina has a couple of kind of corrections we need to make. On my first amendment, amendment 1, it's not alcohol tax at the top, it's general government. And so And it's 200,000, and I've been working with Ona on this. It was supposed to be in the main budget. This is for the 1991 agreement legal effort that we've been ongoing, and it will just maintain our outside counsel who are providing important perspective from the assembly to the administration as we navigate the big challenges. And so the purpose of this amendment is to maintain our outside counsel as we continue to walk down the road of litigation, as we hopefully get to the point where we're all in mutual agreement with the owners, the minority owners on the plan. And so that is just to finish out the work we've been doing. So that's that one. Yeah, so it was an error on the tip. This anticipates to be one time only, because hopefully by the end of next year, we will have sorted all of this out. And so it actually may be a little bit more cost than this, might be up to 300 was the initial approach, but we decided we would put it in at this amount and then sort through what remains at the Q1 process. And so, but that's that. And so there's no more questions. I'll move on to my second one to keep us on time. And this one is to fund, and this one is not one time or multi-year, it's 2 years. I'm hoping it will be funded. And there's some really good, valuable information associated with the amendment. If you look at the back, the fire department has benefited from a project that actually a handful of firefighters wrote a grant to secure funds to pilot a wellness program. The wellness program is providing basic human performance optimization is what they're calling it, but it's fitness training and maintenance. And it's also some physical therapy that is going out into the firehouses and providing services to the firefighters in the firehouse with the intent to reduce the utilization of workers' comp issues that are just endemic in the field because the work is dangerous and it's physically taxing. And so the reason for asking for the funds is to operate this program through the full 3 years because it took them a half a year to get started. They're a year and a half in. And at 3 years, they're going to be able to provide real data on the effectiveness and in fact, the cost savings that it is temporarily showing, but it can't be proven because the data is too short. It's not been in existence long enough. And so these funds would be used to maintain a program that's been developed. The grant funding was for 2 years and it's going away. And we need just a little bit more to get the project over the hill. And again, I do recommend you read the data that's presented about the value. The workers' comp claims haven't come down in this time, but what has come down is the severity of the workers' comp claims. And so one thing that the program is doing is generating strong participation in the reporting of actual injury. So that's in one way why some reports have gone up. They're trying to create a culture of more accurate participation in the various programs. So the intent of this program, and in its fullness, when it is fully implemented, the intent is to add a behavioral health component, which would be a person who is hired ultimately to go do mental health checks and work with people in the firehouses to deal with the traumas that they are kind of buried under in their work. But that's future. Ms. Elton.
Thanks. This is just a question or suggestion is two questions. One, can fire just somehow subsume this cost in its budget in any way, shape or form? I don't know. It's not a huge dollar amount. So it doesn't have to have an answer today, but I would like that inquiry made. And two, this one seems like can you, Ms. Browse, remind us how far under the cap we are?
As of right now, $173,000.
Yeah, so this one might be one where some various budget litter or unspent might be able to help moving into 25, especially if we have FEMA through the end of this year.
Yeah,
Thank you.
You'll note that there's a difference of the numbers there. It's kind of an error on the amendment page. I originally had asked for 286,100 because that's the actual cost of the program annually. And then I had some discussions with the team over at the fire department, and they said that they have some skin in the game. So I reduced it to 200. And if the administration wants to help find some alternative funds, that would be great. So ultimately, this is a cost-saving program, and it's a wellness program that we have had lots of discussions about how we want to keep and maintain and build strength of our workforce. This fits well within that category. Okay, next. Go ahead, Karen.
Is this particular program something that if they find effective, it could be moved to APD? I was talking with someone about injuries there, and I asked, well, do they have to make weight like a military person would? And they said no, because we don't offer any physical training as part of the police department.
So the answer is yes. And in fact, it could be generalized to any of the high injury departments that we have. This is the test program to see how it works. And the reason it's so ideal is because you have kind of a trapped workforce. They're at the firehouse every day when they're working. And so they're there for 24/7, except when they get called out. And so it's able to be very targeted in its approach, and they can work it. But absolutely, it is something that could go to APD. It could go to the laborers. It could go to the heavy equipment operators, folks who tend to find themselves getting injured on the job. Yes. Anything else? I think my last one, hopefully. Yeah. So my last one here, and this one I'm kind of running with Mr. Martinez. It is an increment back to development services through their code abatement fund. We basically, in the Mountain View project, used about $25,000 out of the abatement fund. And I just want to make them whole so they have that money available to take care of a project in your neighborhood. Ms. Alato.
Question for OMB to explore, is this something, abatement fund generally something we could cover with or wrap into our BSSA levy? Would that be an allowable expense? Because they're related, just kind of on two ends of the spectrum. One, ensuring building safety from construction, the other from tear down. So, and it may not be something we can answer today, but I am interested in exploring that.
Through the chair to members Alatella, I believe the initial limitation that I can see is that the BSSA is a service area, and the abatement fund, unless within that service area, wouldn't be fungible necessarily, but it can be considered, and I certainly can look into that further to see if that is possible.
So I love that idea, turning the BSSA fund into a kind of a safety on one side, and which operates the department and can be levied once we get it fixed into projects that would remediate. It's a very interesting idea. Question for you, Ms. Browse, before I yield on the amendments is, do we see any value in another incremental increase to the BSSA levy?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. I think that we need to do a little bit more analysis to see where the BSSA stands in terms of the deficit and also our overall fund balance calculation. That's sort of been the driver in making up those dollars. We're also doing better in the BSSA fund on an annual revenue basis. So the deficit is not growing as much as it had been during a couple of those years.
Okay, Ms. Barley, and then. Ms.
Yeah,
Alato.
on the BSSA, yeah, I'm interested in that. I think the other piece of it is if we can get people building more things, then we'll get more permits back. But that's something we did in 1Q for this year, so that might be something to look at in April. And then my question specifically on this one, is it a one-time or a recurring?
Is, as I said, it's a kind of a little of both. It's 2 years is how I would intend it. By the end of next year, it would be completely studyable. We would have the data we need, and it would be able to ideally justify its existence under the,
Sorry.
oh, this
Yeah,
one
yeah.
time.
Okay,
Yeah. Sorry, I went back to the
okay, yeah, I
other
got
one.
it.
This one, I think that members should be cognizant of if the code abatement team goes out and does this work on behalf of your constituencies, that members should ideally feel some responsibility to advocate to keep the fund whole enough that it can continue to operate next year, so that when another member in another seat or another time has the means to achieve the goal of taking out a terribly deteriorated property that's causing major problems. And so it's a philosophical approach for me. They were very effective at doing this incredible work at the project over in Mountain View, Jamar Hills. What they did was unbelievable. The value they provided with their one-time investment of this effort. And so my goal is to ensure they're able to continue doing that at the level they are today, which is not enough ultimately, which gets to Ms. Zalato's quick point of if we could bake it into one of the other funding streams, it'd be amazing. So, okay, that's it. Another question, go ahead.
Ms. Browse, can you remind me, did we use last year's BSSA levy as a continuation so it's already in and counted under the cap?
Through the chair to members, Zalato, yes.
Okay.
I can confirm exactly whether or not we may have adjusted it a little bit just for numbers, but it's there. And that's one of the other things that you had mentioned, that as we get through paying off that deficit, that funding becomes available again for spending. It's not disappearing. It is property tax revenue that is working in one direction right now and can be amended or changed.
Targeted.
Targeted.
Mr. Blofield.
Thank you. I just got a quick question. It says at the top alcohol tax program, but down at the bottom says general fund. Where are we pulling this increase from?
So yeah, if you look at the bottom, that's accurate. This wouldn't fit within the alcohol tax. It just said, oops. So thanks for clarifying. Go ahead.
For a lot of these amendment templates, the title isn't right. Just look at the bottom line where it says fund
Yeah.
source, and that is the correct one.
That's what I would have guessed. Yeah. So yeah, the header is just the header, but where it says the fund, that is the source. Anna?
It was-
Okay. All right. Next we have, who wants to present amendment number 4?
I will.
Go ahead.
So this is an amendment to, with alcohol tax. I checked in with Arch to see what was happening with that program and was excited to hear that they are opening a detox portion, a detox wing, which is called ASAM 3.7 withdrawal management. They have heard us last year say you need to look for other funding, and they worked hard to successfully braid some funding to help with the center. But with this new program, they need a keyless entry, which is going to be $147,000. And their ask is if we could get $100,000 toward the keyless entry so that their renovation is complete.
Ms. Alto.
Thanks. Maybe you have the wrong department. Wouldn't that be the health department, not the assembly? Because we wouldn't administer that grant. The health department would.
I don't know.
Yes, okay. I just wanted to make sure because I was hoping that we weren't all of a sudden going to be administering a capital grant to a provider.
That, my bad, department, I thought I am assembly. So you may find that similar mistake throughout.
Thanks. So it sounds like this would be a one-time, is that correct?
One time.
Okay, thanks.
Ms. Alto.
What's the timing on this? When are they hoping to get their keyless entry done?
They want to have this program up and running in January.
Okay, I was just wondering what the timing was against their conversations with Rasmussen and the Mental Health Trust. So, or when they would know if they were able to get funding from either of those entities.
My understanding is the whole expansion of the medical spaces has been funded from Mental Health Trust and Rasmussen, and this is what they are still needing.
Thanks for the clarification.
Any further questions on this amendment? No. Okay, thanks. Next, we'll move to amendment number 5. Amendment number 5, Member Ron, go ahead.
Okay, I am hoping to make this program whole, Home for Good. From the very beginning of being on the assembly, I have been completely impressed with what this organization is doing to help some of the most vulnerable people in our city. I don't see what is going to happen with these people that are experiencing physical health issues, chronic mental illness, and from everything I've seen, this group is keeping people from jails, hospitals, using the safety center, emergency rooms. And I would like to continue the program. And so that's why I have put an amendment in.
All right, any questions? Ms. Brolly?
Yeah, same question. Is this one time or recurring?
I think it's going to be recurring because I don't see that our problems are going away. And so I believe it's going to be recurring.
All right, anyone else? Okay, next we have their packet states that they would like us to appropriate for the next 5 years. That's what the packet says, page 6. So that's really $5 million, but not out of this budget. Next, we have Ms. Alatel and youth member Bell. Go ahead.
So the 56,000 that we're asking for would help keep the peer navigator and volunteer coordinator, 2 staff members of the Anchorage Youth Corps, on their staff. As of right now, they only have 6 staff and 5 of them are on site. So without this money, they'd only have 4 staff with 3 of them on site. Anchorage Youth Court has been proven to be effective in preventing youth from committing crimes, and it helps protect disadvantaged youth. So the program is really important, and to lose essential staffers, which is what would happen without this money, could be very detrimental and could affect youth in Anchorage.
And I'll just add briefly, that department should be the health department. And the idea is it would come into the alcohol tax using the unspent funds currently available, and it fits under the prevention bucket. Thank you.
All right, any questions? Ms. Braga?
So Amendment 16 is the same ask. And the only difference is that needs to be done on there is spelling Mr. Meyer's name correctly. So if we could be added to yours, that'd be wonderful.
Great. Oh, no. Ms.
Yes, my question to the sponsors was going to be, is this the amount for the cut from the, okay, I just wanted to make sure that this wasn't from a different line item somewhere.
No, this is meant to make whole the
Decrement.
recurring grant agreement. Yeah.
Great.
Go ahead, Ms. Brolly.
Yeah, thanks. So again, one time or recurring?
One time, I believe there was 1 year left on the multi-year grant agreements AHD issued.
All right, any further questions on that item? Nope, okay. Next, we have amendment number 7 by members Rivera, Volin, and Browley. Go ahead, Ms. Browley.
Yeah, thanks. I'll speak to this one. And then also I will note, well, actually, I'll leave it for now. So this is proposed one-time funding for a technical assistance contract to work with an organization called the National Association of Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, NACOL. This group is a nonprofit. They are, I've spoken with them before. They are not necessarily an advocacy, saying here's explicitly the model or the outcome that we want to see in your community. They really do provide technical assistance. They've worked with a lot of other communities, and this is related to the exploration that several of us have been doing around the idea of civilian oversight of police, whether that's creating an external community body or what that looks like. So that this would be to continue the work that we've already started, but using this contract to help us get that technical assistance and expertise.
Mr. Johnson?
Yeah, thank you. Question. So I see the letter attached to this, and Nicole represents themselves as being the only professional organization providing these services, and I see that this is a sole source contract. And have you looked just to verify the fact that this is the only organization that can do this sort of work, and that there isn't somewhere else we should also be contemplating or putting this out as something like an RFP?
Thanks. That's a good question. I would partly defer to Mr. Rivera. I know he's not on the phone, because he's done a lot more look into this than I have, but I can take that question back. And I think the other thing to note is, because their scope is so specific, obviously many people do facilitation. There's other groups that are operating in the, I guess, civil liberties space or things like that. Because the scope of this is so specific, I think this is why we felt it was appropriate, but that's something we can look into.
Ms. Ellis.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah,
She
just
said
want to
it
make sure we're
was
doing our due diligence here.
All right, thank you. Any other questions on it? Okay, thanks. Amendment number 8, Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, thank you. And can I ask that, can I ask everyone might mute their microphones for the feedback? Okay, thanks. Quickly want to start by saying this is a one-time request. It's for a capital project. Also, there's an updated version of this budget amendment that didn't quite make it into the packet, but one thing I will note is that it's co-sponsored by myself and Randy. And what we're looking for here is to close a small funding to finish construction of the Little Bears Playhouse in Girdwood next year. For those who aren't familiar, Little Bears is a nonprofit providing childcare services in the Girdwood Valley, and for many years they've been operating out of a very small, honestly borderline derelict structure. For the new facility, they've raised, one note to update here, is almost $4 million for construction. That's through a mix of private sources, congressionally delegated spending, and some others. So really what we're looking at is roughly 5% of the project cost that needs to be covered here. Also just note that this is more than shovel ready. They've already started construction. They've already put in the utilities on the site. So this is relative to the scale of the project and certainly the impact it would have for a community, a pretty small ask.
I have a few questions, Ms. Ellis, from Ms. Brown.
Thanks. Can marijuana sales tax be used for capital projects? Okay, I got a nod from Ms. Sprouse. I guess the comment I have, and I don't know how I absolutely feel about it, is capital feels like a slippery slope with such a limited fund source. And I'm just going to leave it at that. And so I have to think about that.
All right, well, yeah. Well,
I'll just
go ahead, Mr. Johnson. This was the first
comment. Yeah, thanks. And I've talked to the administrator.
But go ahead and reply.
Yeah, and I'm not looking to debate, but maybe just a little addition. Sorry, Chris, we keep talking over each other. Can I just offer a little context and certainly not to debate, but it might help answer. Ms. Browse can correct me if I'm wrong here, but looking at the marijuana tax, I believe there's 500,000 in there for capital projects. So I think this fits within there. Now I recognize this would be a substantial portion of that 500,000. So whether or not it goes pure or somewhere else, I'm open-minded to that, but I do believe that there is an existing source within marijuana tax for capital projects.
Ms. Ellis.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson, that was super helpful. I have not read my marijuana tax allocations close enough. And so you're asking out of that bucket of $500,000 for this to be a named project, and then that would leave a remaining $300,000 to either be other named projects or go out for solicitation.
I'm saying that is a option. Frankly, I think this fits well within there. I also recognize this is a pretty substantial portion of that 500,000. So again, I've talked to the administration about this and they might have some more thoughts at a later date, but I don't know if this necessarily has to come from that source. It does seem like a good fit, but I'm open-minded to how we get to the 200,000, or God forbid, if we can't get to that amount, figure out what we can achieve.
Okay, thank you so much.
Next, we have,
Sorry, I had a question.
oh, go ahead, Ms. Ryan.
Yeah, first on the ACE fund tax, there is 2024 money when the implementation team talked about one time. So just to say, there's what's collected for 2025, and then there's also what's collected for 2024. And the original intent with the capital projects was to use that one-time 2024 money. My question is to Ms. Browse. I know the ACE Fund Board met, I believe, on the 31st. And I also am just wondering how we deal with giving them the ability to give recommendations and where this fits in with these amendments and any future amendments we might get.
Through the chair to member Brawley, I don't quite know the answer to that as far as the mechanics of how we do the back and forth, but I know that they met and the recommendations from the implementation team are mostly incorporated as part of the marijuana tax proposed budget for the 2025 year, which includes some of their 2024 recommendations and the 2025 recommendations rolled together because of the timing that we're in right now. The board was not appointed and hadn't convened in 2024 with enough time to actually appropriate and spend any of that money. So both of those years of funding will be available in 2025 to spend. If there are changes within the marijuana tax in an S version, I think we would likely want to communicate that with the board so that they're aware of what those changes are. But ultimately, it's the decision of the mayor and the assembly how those monies are spent.
Ms. Alto.
Thanks. So I'm a little confused on process here with this new structure. If the board has met, has the board taken action to make recommendations for the marijuana tax, regardless if it's 24 or 25 money? Because we're kind of taking up both now.
My understanding is no.
No. Okay, so the only recommendations we have is from the implementation team. And so I guess, and this might be a question that has to go back and come forward again, is why didn't they take up the recommendations of the implementation team and vote on those? Now that we've fully constituted a board, we did so very quickly with a quorum. And I think that is something, because it's not the implementation team's recommendations I'm as interested in as the board's recommendations. And that would be, I think if we're going to follow any recommendations from an outside body, it needs to be an appropriately appointed and confirmed body. And then we get by resolution or whatever, so we can add it as an AIM or something into the actual record. So maybe it's a process improvement for next year, but thanks.
Ms. Brawley.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, the context I could offer, implementation team was something co-led by assembly members and school board and others in the health department. And then we adopted multiple, some accepting, just reports and things like that. So I think ideally the board is the one weighing in, but the timing was such that it wasn't possible. And so not to say if the IT is acting as the board, but that was the only concrete recommendations that were given to the administration at this point. So I'm not defending that that's how it should have been, but that's how it happened.
Through the chair to members Alatel, I believe that depending on the course of this conversation, we might be able to get a letter of support or resolution from the body in advance of approval of the budget on the 19th. The other consideration is that the funding, we're not sure when it will actually get out because this is a new program and needs to be stood up as part of our ongoing process. So by 1Q, there will be budget changes, I would imagine, during that process, and that will come with board resolution of support.
Okay, go ahead, and then we'll go to Mr. Farina.
Thanks. Mr. Johnson, based on what we just heard from Ms. Browse, it says the gap in order to begin construction next year. What's the timing for this? It sounds like perhaps there's going to be some more process-oriented pieces with the marijuana tax between now and 1Q. And so my question is on timing. Does it matter if this money gets out between January and April, or is it still valuable April on of next year?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would have to get back to you on that. I'd have to contact the nonprofit that's leading the project to see where it stands. I mean, again, as I point out, I know that work has started. When they need the funding in order to complete, the 2025 scope, I would have to find out. I certainly can say I think it would be advantageous to get it out sooner rather than later, but I don't know if it's absolute.
Mr. Farina.
Through the chair, I just want to explain the email I just sent to everybody and the piece of paper I passed out. It is a summary I just made really quickly of all the amendments in the packet in the fund, cost center, and one-time versus reoccurring amounts are more accurate than the packet as I updated it with what you've talked about today. But this is a summary, and the totals in there in the bold about the middle are the total for each fund for all the amendments.
So what might have or be valuable then is another set of numbers, which are what remains to under the cap kind of a thing. Where are those funds at? So people can see how to prioritize relatively, because the way this reads, we could just do it all, but I know that there's a fiscal constraint. And so see that as well.
So Chair, I have a version of that, and once we're done with this work session, I'm gonna make sure all my amendments match everything we've talked about, and I'll send it out to everybody.
Fair enough. That's just for people's understanding. This is the want category, not the what we have to fund it with category. Okay. Mr. Lewis.
Thank you. One quick one for the new spreadsheet just came out great, but the fourth one down, the home for good should be 1 million, not 100,000. Like the spreadsheet, thank you.
And again, I would reinforce to the public that's here, just because you see it and we're talking about it doesn't mean it's happening. This is the process for vetting, pre-vetting projects before we get to debate. Next, we have Amendment 9, Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm going to preface all of my amendments by saying that these are for discussion. So, excuse me. So that's what they're for. So the first one is amendment using alcohol tax funding to Department of Health, essentially restoring half of the early education grants to providers. That's the ASD pre-K classrooms. And the recommendation, knowing we have this fiscal constraint, is just to finish out the 2024-2025 school year, because the school district uses the same as the state fiscal year. So basically, these are cut for the second semester of this year. So proposing putting it back. And then beyond that, I think is an open question, what happens?
Okay, go ahead, Ms. Alto.
So are you saying that without this money, that these services will end in the next year, the second half of the school year?
That is my understanding, because they're not funded, but I haven't had time to talk to the school district about that, but that's my understanding.
Okay, I think, I like what you're doing here, but I would like to get that kind of verified by the school district, either from the administration or you, Ms. Brawley, so that we have a little bit more context on the urgency. Thank you.
So I'm going to ask a couple of questions. So if this is $1 million per half year, did we fund $2 million previously?
Yes, since the first version of first iteration of this budget in FY21.
So again,
Sorry, FY22.
here we are still needing to address this idea of multi-year grants. So another question I have, this seems like it is directly in the zone of the ACE fund, early education. And so I'm just super curious why we would use alcohol tax funds instead of direct it that way.
So my rationale was the voters approved the ACE fund, in my mind, the intent being additive to what we're already doing. So the implication of shifting almost basically 40% of that funding into something that we've already been funding doesn't feel like an addition to me. So that was why I did not choose to use ACE fund here.
Okay, Ms. Prowse.
To the chair and sponsor, there is $2 million of funding for early education to ASD in the ACE fund budget currently. So I believe Member Brawley's intention is to put $1 million in the alcohol tax, which is where it was originally funded from. There was some bad labeling, I will say, on the initial marijuana tax titles that made them confusing. So it wasn't clear that this was this funding moving into this funding. It looked like it was a different label.
Does that then mean we're being asked to appropriate $3 million to this project?
If this amendment were incorporated or accepted, yes.
Unless it's replacement.
And so if we have two scenarios here, one is we're appropriating 3 million or we're freeing up $1 million. Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, I'll just say that my intent was not to add additional money. I was going off of the labeling in the budget and assuming that's not what it was for. So just to be clear, I'm not proposing 3 million. I'm proposing that if this was actually cut out of the other budget, and otherwise it would be moving it to this alcohol tax budget.
So between Mr. Farina, Ms. Browse, and Ms. Brawley, hopefully we can figure out the crosswalk to get this so that we don't have to take it up and it's just done.
I believe Member Brawley has the first passed amendment.
Because it's already done. Okay. Thank you. Good enough. Those are the questions. And I need clarifying.
Wait. I missed what was just said. Say that again.
That
The-
It's already in the budget.
The funding source that she is trying to represent in her amendment is already in the budget. It's mislabeled.
It's funded with marijuana tax.
Correct.
Okay, there we go. I just had to be really specific.
Yes.
Thanks.
Right. And so, yeah, it's funded. That is the gist. But it also falls into that category of multi-year projects. We still have work to do on addressing our kind of overall policy and then aligning our policy to make sure we are not becoming the sole granting source, the foundation for various programs or projects. We'll get to that. Next is Ms. Brawley is amendment number 10.
Yeah, thank you. And again, I'll preface with this is for discussion, including where the department goes. I assigned it to OMB thinking that this is something related to our budget, but it could also go to the mayor's office or assembly. The idea being that I believe we should be having a robust public conversation and engage the public in our fiscal future. That's the term that I'm using here. Essentially, that we should be looking at that, not just with a specific proposal. We certainly have multiple on the table right now, but really to do more broad visioning and goal setting. Sorry, so I'm not proposing creating a plan, but I believe there should be some resources in addition to what we can bring with staff capacity. I brought this up with the administration just as a preliminary measure, but that is the idea. So the amount would also be for discussion, but I believe this is important and we have a great opportunity to do that in 2025.
Ms. Zalato.
Thanks. So this puts this in your court, Ms. Browse, should this amendment pass. I guess my question to the administration, and actually it might need to go more broadly under the chief administrative offices, I guess it's a capacity issue. I think we've got a lot going on. And so if such an amendment were to pass, what is the realistic timing of this? Or is this something we could look at 1Q? And that may be for you or maybe for Mr. Falsey later.
Through the chair to Member Zalatel, I believe the goal would be to understand entirely the sponsor's intent, whether or not the administration adopts it as part of the S version. I think the conversation would take place as to where the appropriate home is, how much funding might be available, and what would be possible. And I think it's reasonable for this to be a first quarter addition or change, but that would depend on what the intent of the timeline for the communications are.
All right. Next one, Ms. Brawley, amendment number 11.
Yeah, similar situation. Wasn't sure where to put this one. But the general idea is in 2025, we will celebrate the Muni's 50-year anniversary. I'm coining the term unification. And I am not envisioning something on the lines that the Anchorage Centennial was. I don't know how much that budget was. It was a lot. There was a lot of community grants. But I do think it is a milestone that we should consider celebrating. So again, this is for discussion, and I'm not 100% on what the specific budgets would be, but that would be, again, something to work with either the administration to lead or to co-lead with the Assembly administration.
Questions? Ms. Zalato?
Sorry, it's a comment, but did you know September 16th is the most popular birthday in the world? So the Muni shares it. Anyway, FYI. My daughter's birthday.
Anyone else?
Comment. Well, doesn't that make it popular? Doesn't that make it popular by?
Not if you hate your birthday.
All right, Ms. Brawley.
Yeah,
Number
thanks.
12.
Thanks. So this one is an alcohol tax amendment. It is essentially restoring the other million. The $2 million community grant funding is what most of the folks were testifying about on Wednesday. And so this is actually it's doing the same thing as the youth court one, except that it's restoring the full $1 million so that it addresses all of the current grantees.
Could we get a list, like some kind of a breakdown Yeah, but it would be nice to have it associated with this so that we understand what we're talking about. Doesn't have to be handed out now, but for the purposes of next week or the following, let's itemize them in such a way that folks can see. Thank you. Any other questions or comments on this one? And but I just wanted associated with the amendment. And so, go ahead.
I forgot to say as well, I'm proposing this as a one-time, again, with the conversation of, that these are grants that have already been awarded with some expectation of multi-year. But just to be clear, I'm not proposing this recurring, although it has been recurring in the budget in the past.
And I think that if this does pass, I don't know that we'll need intent language per se, but we should directly communicate the concerns about understanding multi-year versus 1 year to the recipient organization so that we are able to kind of make sure we're communicating reality effectively. All right, the next one, Ms. Brawley, number 13.
Thanks. Yeah, almost there. This one is a small one. And again, for discussion with the mayor's office, essentially providing some small resources for what I'm calling host city event sponsorship. So this is not contemplating one specific event, but just there's multiple things that happen in our community that are very significant. Alaska Federation of Natives Convention, Arctic Encounter, other things. And so this is a discussion that could go in the general fund. And it may be things that have been paid for in the past when our budget was more flush years ago. Or it is something that could be discussed in the context of promoting tourism in the bed tax. So if that happens, this would not necessarily go in the main budget, but just to say, this is something where I think we could be supportive and really encouraging for events that we are the physical host for.
Questions, Ms. Alto?
An observation, generally, we don't touch the mayor's budget and hopefully the mayor doesn't touch ours. So it might be community development or whatever they're renaming that department to, might be a more appropriate place, just FYI.
Or the alternative would be, or us, or reach out to the 8th floor and ask them to join you. That way it's joint and not kind of a breach of the separation of powers. Okay, next we have Ms. Brawley.
Thanks. This one is back to alcohol tax. It is restoring at least part of the funding that's been in there again since the first year this budget was passed for alcohol tax education and outreach. I do recognize this one also says mayor's office. The original version of this funding that was put in fall 2021 was to the mayor's office with the intent that that would be an appropriate place to maintain those communications. The assembly had since moved that to the assembly branch. That is what funded all of the work on Cheers Anchorage and really communicating out to the public, the website. It is separate from the strategic planning money, which is not what this is intended to be. But it is really recognizing that we need to continue maintaining this education. So again, this is for discussion where it should live and who will own this project. But I believe it's an important project that we should continue.
Yeah, I appreciate the amendment. I agree it's important work. I think it should just be continuation funding and we should continue the work as it's gone. It's in the assembly branch. Because there's historical knowledge there and, collaborative effort already done with the rest of the MOA. Thanks.
Ms. Brawley at number 15.
Thanks. This one is again looking at some choices that were made in the mayor's version of the budget regarding marijuana tax versus alcohol tax. There was money to Best Beginnings. This has been funding the Imagination Library Program. I believe it started as 150,000 and then was increased to 250 last year. So this has been a significant increase, and also just recognizing that there are a lot of worthy causes that have been funded, and 250,000 to this particular organization versus all of the other need we've heard felt like worth kind of considering if that's the highest priority. So this does two things. It cuts the funding from last year in half and what's in the 2025 budget and moving forward. And then it moves this from ACE fund to alcohol tax, again, with the idea that this funding, it does relate to early literacy, it's not necessarily early education and childcare. So I think we need to be clear. There's a Venn diagram of how these two funds can be used. My opinion is that this is not something that's in the Venn that fits with both, but it does fit with alcohol tax.
Questions? Next is amendment number 16. I think we already talked about this one. Then we have new amendment. Oh, excuse me. We have an amendment 17, Mr. Martinez.
Thank you, Chair. The amendment 17, I guess it was just added. I apologize for missing the today's packet. Essentially is, and I think the dollar amount might be will be a little more accurate, but essentially restoring $76,000 to New Life Development. We heard testimony from New Life on the Wednesday's assembly meeting. That was the program that was working with women, children, and we heard testimony from one of the pregnant expected mothers as well. And so I wanted to make sure we restored it. I also heard that that was part of Raleigh's bigger look, but this was the specific amendment to restoring New Life Development Service. I think it's an important program. Thank you, Chair.
All right, thank you. So this one is also under the omnibus, but we'll have it just in case that one doesn't go. So also, though, I want to clarify on the amendment form, it's got two numbers, 76,000 or 56,000. It's 76. So just for folks to see, slight difference there. Okay, next we'll move on to the capital improvement budget. This is amendment number 1. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I'll briefly share about it and then maybe I can turn to Mr. Johnson because he spoke with AFD in more detail. This is an amendment to the CIB, so this year's capital improvement budget. It is not adding to the bonds. It is specifically a state legislative request. And I mentioned yesterday in legislative committee that this is something being included in the state legislative program, at least in the draft right now. And then it lists 3 different activities. And I'll just turn to Mr. Johnson to speak to this in more detail.
Johnson.
Yeah, thanks. And I'll keep it pretty quick. The first 2 priorities speak to the fuel breaks, right? And that is essentially a gap in the wooded material that provides fuel for a fire. And the priority is to clear those along access routes. As we mostly know, people who live close to the Chugach, some of those neighborhoods have 2 or even just 1 way in and out of the neighborhood. And so if a fire cuts off that escape route, there's a pretty terrifying life safety risk to that. And we also know that the wildfire hazard is one that is growing and I hate to say probably will continue to grow with climate change. And so AFD highlighted this when we asked them what their priorities were as it related to wildfire hazard. This is the list they came back with to us. And I'll just add for a little context, I was able to drive through Lahaina last week, which, as I think we all know, was a city devastated by a wildfire incident just a few years ago, and it's horrifying. It looks like a war zone. So I hate to see something like that happen in Anchorage, and I think this is a reasonable request to the state legislature to hopefully provide a significant safety benefit. Also, just quickly touch on the UAS program. This would be the cost to establish the program. There would also be some ongoing operational costs with that. AFD, has not done a deep dive into it, but I think the number they came back with was around $60,000 or $70,000 annually to maintain it. But the UAS, while that has benefits related to wildfire hazards, also would serve with a broad range of AFD incidents that they respond to. So that one would be, essentially a bull-wide benefit, and I think work with a whole range of scenarios they deal with. So I'll pause there.
So I just note that the amendment as it stands says bonds, so it will need to be clarified. And there's a policy on unmanned aerial systems in the municipality. So any project that falls under that will have to align with and maybe update that policy should we move to pass this. So it's pretty specific and restrictive. Anyone else? No, okay, so, that moves us to amendment number 2 under the general government capital improvement budget. Mrs. Member Sprawley and President Dia.
Yeah, thanks. Just briefly, this is making 2 changes related to West Anchorage area capital projects. One is Forest Park Drive. It is currently funded in the 2026 CIP for a bond. It was originally 600,000, passed in 2023, and that's what the budget for repaving Forest Park Drive, narrowing the lanes to allow for more shoulder for pedestrian and bike safety. It's been something that's been on the Turnigan Community Council Safe Routes to Schools program for about 10 years. It's one of the last projects to be done. Anyway, it was funded, then discovered there's some additional drainage work that needs to be done. So this would move the funding up a year into the 2025 bond in order to be able to complete that project that's already been partially funded. So that's the proposal. The second one is deprioritizing or shifting a state request that's in the CIB right now and moves it from 2025 to 26 so that it is not something that we send to Juneau as a request.
All right, any questions? Go ahead.
So this is a question for Ms. Brous. So we're going to possibly make some CIP amendments. I guess and we may need an email response back. These are meant to inform the ultimate bond amount for the ARTSA bond in particular. Because whatever the bond amount is, because of when bonds are noticed, it's really hard for us to amend to add projects into the bond without having to then take something out of the bond. So I guess to the extent, and as we go through any S versions of the budget, the CIP, CIB don't rise to the level of the operating budget always. So I think what I'm looking for, the request is some form of communication about whether or not these will be totaled in the ARTSA bonds or added into those project lists, because by the time we actually see the bond packages introduced, it will be too late for us as members. So I guess it's a bit of a request, not getting us into a weird procedural piece should we not have alignment.
Through the chair to members, Alatel, I understand what you're asking for, and I think that we will be able to add a sort of narrative explanation of the changes that are being made. One, to explain anything that may be unclear, but also to explicitly state that the amendments in this format were adopted in this way. And I know that there have been a couple of changes that were made in the past that are not reflected in the current capital proposal. Some of those will be added and annotated so that you can see those changes as well. I understand the challenge between the timing on the budget passage and the bond titling, and we can work to make sure that that is appropriate based on the amendments that are incorporated.
Amendment number 3 of the capital improvement budget.
Thanks. Yeah, this is a proposal, also changing bonds. So again, for discussion, to essentially double funding under the ARTSA Pedestrian Safety and Rehabilitation Program and the ARTSA Road and Drainage Rehabilitation Program. They're actually programmed in future years for 2 million and beyond, but they're 1 million each in here. I chose ARTSA specifically because that includes West Anchorage, and 2 of our big issues are, pedestrian and bike safety, as well as drainage issues. And I know that's shared across the city, but that's the proposal.
Thank you. Ms. Brous, do you know if there's anything in the budget that supports re-upping the efforts on the stormwater utility? I don't recall anything, but I'm kind of curious because the idea of increasing road and drainage rehabilitation annual program somewhat intersects with, are we going to have another funding source that we're seriously talking about soon?
Through the chair to members, Alatel, I don't believe there is anything currently included in the budget that supports further exploration or standing up of the stormwater utility, but we can look into whether or not there was anything that was set aside for that initially, if any funding remains, and what the process would be to entertain that conversation. There are quite a few line items within our budget and our capital projects that are only about drainage.
Yeah, I understand that. And then I think the secondary question is if we increase both of these, if we essentially double both of these, are we staffed up and ready to be able to use the funding in any kind of reasonable time period? And that might have to come from Mr. Colhase ultimately, but that would be my only caution is that we go ahead and bond for these funds. And I know they don't like expire next year, but what's the, are we going to get too fast in the cadence of work that we're actually unable to speed up any faster than what is proposed?
Through the chair to members Alatel, I will say that that is actually one of the considerations that the administration took while we were building these numbers was where is the capacity, where is the previously appropriated funding, how much remains, what is the workflow that is possible in 2025, because we've had some challenges over the last few years with vacancies. So completed work has fallen off a little bit. We want to make sure that we aren't overfunding as we move forward. If we have money sitting in the bank that no one to do the work, but specifically around these drainage projects and pedestrian safety and rehab, there is a lot of need within the community. And these items are the buckets of funding, the ARDSA drainage program. They are not the specific road drainage items that are in the rest of the capital projects, but that does not mean that this funding can't be used to accomplish drainage fixes within those projects. So I think there is flexibility in some of this, but ultimately, I'd have to speak with Mr. Colhase in order to determine whether or not the additional money could be spent in 25.
It's probably.
Yeah, and I can share too. I met with Mr. Colhase, Ms. Cole Haas, Chelsea Ward Waller, and a few others on just to discuss really West Anchorage projects in general, and help me hone in on what amendments to make. So I'll be clear because they were clear. They were not taking a position because they said that is not their call to do. But they did indicate that they're that if they got an increase in drainage funding, that they could utilize that funding for sure. So, but I can follow up with more detail. And just to be clear, also, I'm not anticipating that all of this money or any of this money would necessarily be used in West Anchorage because I understand it's an ARTSA project.
I think that the fundamental question is capacity, timeline, and context of storm drains and safety and all these other pieces that are moving. So, yeah, that's the real question. And okay, then Ms. Alatel, amendment number 4 to the capital improvement budget.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is myself and should be Mr. Rivera as well. This shifts and returns back to 2025, the Coventry area storm drain improvements. This could be handled a couple of ways. One, we could shift the project forward back to 2025 for design at the $250,000 mark. I'm not too worried about capacity because design is generally outsourced via contracts. And what I was told by Mr. Colhase is we didn't make some threshold cutoff. How that cutoff is determined is a real mystery, I will tell you, from where we sit. And it's really an interesting position to be in when you're working with your constituents. We're going year over year and we're kind of waiting our turn and suddenly you're bumped. And so if the administration's approach is to do a larger wholesale increase to storm drainage projects, I'm open to it, but I want to be able to communicate to my constituents one way or the other what's happening with them. PM&E has been great and has come and patched this up and tried its best for years and years. But that's also getting very expensive. Basements flood twice a year in this area.
We're moving into debate.
No, I'm not. I'm explaining why I'm bringing it.
Okay.
You have emails, basements flood twice a year on this. It's expensive for my constituents, and getting the design underway means there could be relief in sight for them. That is why we're pulling it forward.
Anyone else? Questions, Karen?
So I just think about all the projects in my area of town that deal with drainage too. And I just wonder if we should not be looking at the larger, as you said, just going forward with that stormwater utility. I'm thinking of Kenny Hill Drive. That hasn't made it on any lists. They flood every year, twice a year. same sort of situation. And I think we've got a crisis on our hands. So, yeah.
Okay, others on that, Mr. Littlefield?
I'm just looking at this proposal and it says in the description, amendment 26 to 25, and I can see that. However, we've got in 2029, the majority of the projects out there. Are we looking to design and then build in 2029? Or are we looking to move forward at a faster pace?
I wasn't going to push forward on construction till I knew I had design. I think if we make it through and we get the design, we would bring the additional amendment to move forward from 2029 to 2028. But one is precedent on the other. So we were waiting and seeing. Because there's other opportunities, of course, to advocate for the project as well, either through AMATs and the TIP or if there's a larger bucket of funding. So we don't know where it would fall depending on where we can find the design money.
So I have a question on this. So is the 22.5 million already in 2029? So if we were to reflect this the way our standard would be somehow like minus 250 plus 250, I don't know how we.
So the parenthesis 250 would actually go in 2026. So that's the design money. The construction money is 2029. This is construction and this is
I
design.
see. Okay, gotcha now. Now I see.
Yep.
Okay. So it's currently programmed in the budget for 2026
Yep.
for design.
It had been last year in 2025. This year it got bumped to 2026. We're proposing to bring it back to 2025.
Understood. Okay, thank you. I just couldn't see it visually. Other questions? Okay, there's one missing amendment, and that's at least, it's the conforming amendment. We already did.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that one is kind of consumed into the omnibus one and exists separately. So we went through that, but there will be also for folks to understand a conforming amendment, which will allow, as we make these moves on the floor, the OMB staff to work with the clerk and update or our finance team, update the budget to make sure we don't create any errors by trying to make changes on the floor. And so that language will also be coming in the form of amendment. It's a standard amendment. So then I know there were a couple of unpublished yet amendments that folks were going to maybe speak about. So Mr. Myers and then Ms. Zalatil, then Ms. Braga. Okay, Mr. Myers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we're waiting on some information before I can submit this. Basically, we need to find out if Chugach Rural Fire Department is at their mill rate. They're asking for $62,004 to be increased in their budget for 2025 for EMS, and they sent me an entire list of what the information is going to go to. So I can either go over that with you, or it's all been sent to Ona and to Matt. And once I get the answer, I'll have that amendment prepared. Their budget, so that would bring their total budget to $850,250.
And that's paid from what source?
Within their mill rate.
So it's from the Eagle River
Right.
tax base.
Yeah,
Okay.
I just need to find out if they have that much money left.
One time or recurring?
I would assume recurring.
Recurring, yeah,
Yeah.
just build into their budget level. So, okay, yeah, that sounds like a accounting process more than anything. Okay. Ms. Braga?
I hope it's okay to circle back on Amendment 5. I was like Doe in the headlights and did a terrible job. Anyway, first off, I would like to amend this to say 500,000. It's important that this program continues, and 500,000 would help them gain support from philanthropy, which sees the municipality as also having buy-in to this program. It's outcomes based. The muni only pays when the outcomes are achieved, which are months of stable housing. This funding will allow them to add new participants to the program, which is especially important as we're looking at cold weather shelter ending in the spring and this funding ending. And so I just want to reiterate that these people that we're talking about have complex housing barriers, and this program has a proven track record And if we could get to 500,000, it would be extremely important to this group to show that we also support the program.
Okay, anyone else? Mr. Littlefield.
Since we're going back, you went.
So ideally, we.
Sorry,
we-
I started
we
the
should-
trend.
Thank you. And my question is for Member Brawley on amendment number 15. And I see that it's a decrease and from the marijuana tax fund. Is that freeing up funds in the marijuana tax fund?
Yeah, that would be the intent. And just to document, I did go back, for your information. The Best Beginnings was added by Member Voland in FY '23, I believe it was during the 1Q process. So it was 150,000. In 2024, the mayor's budget increased that money to 250,000. So I still need to go back and talk to Best Beginnings about this, but I know that this is not, I know that this was for Imagination Library expansion. So I need to understand what they were using the money for.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Farina gave us our totals. So right now, if all of our amendments were adopted and nothing else changed in the budget, we'd be $562,004 over the tax cap. And if all of our amendments were adopted with no changes into the budget, we'd be 2 million over in a tax. So there will be some choices that will have to be made. As Ms. Browse explained, there are some other fund sources to also look at. So I think that that's just important context to keep in mind as we move through this process. I have every confidence in Ms. Browse to help guide us through that. But when the S version comes out, you'll want to look and see, and of course, you'll probably have already had communication from the administration whether or not your amendment made it. And then if you plan to still, if it did not, and you still plan to bring it, you will need to bring it in the context of the S if you could, because that will probably be the intent to move the S. Thank you.
So, Karen,
I just wanted to ask, that figure you just said, is that with the 500,000 for Home for Good?
I did the math in real time.
You are fast.
Thank you for the round number.
beware. Beware. So, go ahead.
Through the chair, for any members that want to be sponsors on any of these, just let me know based on the amendment number, because right now there's just one person on all of them.
But let's not do that here. Do that by email, please. Yeah.
Can we, whatever amendments are included in the S version of the budget, will include as an AM those amendments that are as part of the S, and then the rest of the amendments will be the amendment packet on the table for discussion on the 19th. I hope that makes sense. So that way your amendment and the fact that you made an amendment that helped inform the S is still in the record.
So I'm going to pivot the conversation now. Hopefully someone is prepared to speak to the CASA CIP process. No one? You don't have anyone? So members have been asking for months, and even before this administration came in. There are real concerns about equity of that project, and there's pressure. Well, we have the opportunity, we better spend it. There are LRSAs that are really grateful to have ARDSA members pay for their road improvements. And there are those of us who want to support the project but can't until such a time as we have a plan that shows us where the money is intended to go over a number of enough years that we can start to see that we're not just doing road repair and replacement for people who haven't road repaired and replaced, but we're actually providing access. And so it's a very important piece for folks. And I know we have a little bit more time to make our way through the process to get to January when the budget's finalized, when the ballot's finalized. It's really important that we do that. And so we've been asking, and hopefully we get an answer.
To the chairman and the rest of the body, I believe that we will be having the CASA conversation on the ongoing basis in order to get to January. The challenge has just been standing up the mechanics of it on the internal side and bringing everybody together to get to a place where the administration is comfortable with what the proposal looks like and moving forward and how we would be able to manage it. But yes, that is top of mind.
And if the proposal is a specific set of projects, then the administration has gone a step beyond where the body is at. If the work that's being done is the process, we welcome that conversation. That's kind of the rub. Okay.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Ms. Bronco.
Well, I wanted to speak to the CASA when we met with Kent Colhase and Lance and Graham. There was a discussion that the road improvements on Sunnyside of Flat Top were delayed because the state is putting parking in now at the end, and they don't want us to do the road improvement that's, you fall into craters as you're trying to get to the top there. So it had been pushed down the road to where what was approved by the voters to improve Sunnyside is now going to be 2026. And so we talked about doing a smaller project, which was eliminated from the CASA last year, the Basher parking. And anyway, on PM&E's page 64, it appeared we were addressing it, but the description is off. And I just wanted to know if I want to promote that, and I want to know if this is not going forward how it is. I want to do an amendment to it, but it does say it's CASA Basher Trailhead, only Chugach State Park is designated trailhead adjacent and serving East and North Anchorage residents. So I'm hoping that's going forward, but I have not heard definitively if it is.
Through the chair to member Bronga, as far as I know, that appropriation was included as part of the budget proposal, and the mechanics of it are what you will see coming forward in the bond.
Okay.
And therein lies a lot of feelings you're going to hear about right now. Miss Alatil, no, first Miss Brawley, then Miss Alatil, then myself.
Yeah, just very briefly, just for also context, something in the legislative program proposed right now is not funding specifically, but it's asking for a statutory change to allow the city to coordinate and be able to bond for things on state parkland. So that's all I know about it right now, but I just want to put that out there. Thanks.
Alatil.
Yeah, I think what Ms. Bronga just raised is where I'm still a little bit lost on CASA. What I would like to see is the project list and what years they're proposed. Just like, to use my own example, Coventry Drive, it's proposed to happen in particular years, just like another project is proposed to happen in particular years. And so in my district, I get a sense of what's moving when and for how much. And that's what I've been asking for it since last spring. So there's the Basher piece that's moving. There's the one that's delayed that's moving. I think there are others planned. And if we could sequentially put those out from in the next 6 years, which ones are moving only in design, which ones are moving actually in construction, and how much those dollar amounts are proposed. Because right now, what I'm missing is the ability to talk with my constituents. And I want to thank Mr. Johnson for including one of my constituents in this conversation now from Midtown, is how many times are we going back and asking for more projects, and when can they expect that? Should they be expecting a CASA bond every year, and for how much? Or is it going to be 1 in 25, but not again until 27 because of the way the projects are sequenced? Because as we know with bond projects in particular, we might approve them in 24, but we don't actually see the results of them till 26 or 27, yet we might go back to the voters and ask for some more money for the next one. And so it's really that like cognitive dissonance if you're just in the public of, I thought I already gave you money for that thing and I haven't seen it yet, and now I want more money, versus something that's a very operationalized, I guess, year over year bond like ARTSA, because there are these just programs that move.
And here we find now we're paying for this year's project, but it's not going to happen. But we're going to now dip back in. And how many projects are we going to be running and hoping get built? And there's no context. This is super frustrating. So it sounds like the administration has already made their choice, and it sounds like that's just the plan. And it feels like that's just going to be the way this thing rolls, is that these projects are going to get funded. They're going to roll over everybody, and it's just going to be the whim of the loudest of the LRSA replacement projects. So I do get feelings about this, and only because it's out of context. It's not fair. It's taking from the people who live down here. It's taking from the people who live in Mountain View. It's taking from the people who live in Fairview, and it's giving it to the people who live up there and don't pay their share in a burden. And we're stacking it up now. It's like kindling. We're just stacking
Point
it
of
up so
order.
they can have, no, ma'am, no. And so that's what it looks like is going on here. And so I need the administration to lead on this. Go ahead.
Through the chair to Member Brongo, Member Zalatal, and the chairman. The details that you are requesting fall in line with the conversation that we had a couple of assembly meetings ago with Member Zalatel's resolution to include additional bonding information in the capital projects. That would include a CASA detail. That is the work that the administration is doing in order to determine what that looks like going forward for capital budgeting purposes. We can't do everything all at the same time immediately when we get in. It takes us time to make deliberative decisions and take process into consideration while we're making these choices. There is nothing nefarious going on with the CASA deliberations. You will be involved in the conversation. We understand the challenges that have occurred over the last couple of years, particularly around the capital budget, and we're sensitive to that. So please don't hesitate to ask if you are concerned, but we will endeavor to always involve you.
I'll speak to that point of order. I was not debating an amendment. There was no amendment. It wasn't part of a debate. It's an expression of deep frustration about how this whole thing is rolling. And it's Groundhog Day. We're here, we're here, we're here, we're here. It's the same story. And I do trust you and believe in you, Ona. I do. These are just real feelings that have to be expressed. They have to be expressed. I mean, Davis Park doesn't get this kind of love. There's a special proposal now on the books, and we're just going to roll projects to take care of people's neighborhoods. Zach, you were in the queue.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, I think Ona mostly said what I was going to say before I said it. Just for a little extra context, I mean, when we came into this and proposed the first, again, could people mute their mics? When we came into this process for the first time last year, you know, the CASA sponsors, we sat down with the administration and talked about how do we want to manage this, and it's their prerogative, but essentially said they had no interest and would not support the CASA bonds. We were sort of left in this vacuum, if you will, to try and come up with ourselves. And I hear the feedback about what was problematic about it and how we want to do better going forward. And I am really grateful that we have an administration that supports us in that. I want to say the comments I hear from you and Vice Chair Zalatel, like we are taking those to heart, and we want to figure out a way to handle this that feels inclusive and like everyone in the bowl who ultimately will have to pay for these bonds has a voice. So again, I just want to speak to the fact that this is ongoing, and we have an opportunity now that didn't exist last year with a supportive administration. And yeah, it'll take time, but I want you to know that, you know, the comments are heard. And then again, just to remind folks broadly, you know, I mean, the creation of the CASA bond was a ballot initiative that the voters approved by a substantial margin. And the bond that was taken up last year was, again, supported by the voters by a substantial margin. So like, yeah, let's do the work to figure out how to manage this better and how to create a program that's, you know, sustainable and hopefully is well supported by the assembly. But again, just to remind folks, this is something that maybe not everyone in the bowl is excited about, but the majority of people are and have been, and I think will be.
I think that the answer to solve all of these things is transparency and process, not whim. Ms. Braga, and then Ms. Alto.
I really don't feel like this was not transparent. The Sunnyside road improvements was on the ballot, and it passed by the majority of voters in the ARTSA, and it is important. It passed the first time, and as Member Johnson said, it wasn't like just CASA on the ballot this last year, and we'll just take some money and we'll do whatever we want. It was a specific project, and it had delays, not by any fault of us. Is the state that's going to put parking in that has slowed this down, and I think it's fabulous. I think this has paved the way for them to start taking some more responsibility for access to the Chugach. And it's a perfect opportunity. The Basher parking, we have the state saying they will sign an MOU to maintain it. And those partnerships are happening because of the CASA.
It is well understood that there are people who believe this process has been transparent. Ms. Zalato.
So I'm going to make a concrete request, and I think hopefully this can get us out of some of this conversation, is I realize we're going to take up the CIP and CIB on the 19th. I'm not asking for a 5-year CASA plan by then. That's unrealistic. What I would ask is the best plan you can come up with, if you are going to run a CASA bond in January for the ballot, run a CIP, CIB amendment alongside with it. And I know those are subject to change. We take them up every year, but run with as much as you know. That for me would give me a lot of, it would take care of my concern, which is very process oriented. And that I can then go talk to my constituents when if we vote to put that on the ballot, say, hey, okay, so here's the plan right now. And every November, they'll talk about the plan again, and they might make changes to that plan. And that will indicate whether or not a bond is moving forward the following spring. And that just gives them those pieces and those community councils pieces to look for, so that they understand it. I think for Midtowners in particular, they're really focused on that CIP list, right? The ARTSA CIP list, because that's what's top of mind for them. That's what their community council has put forward. And this is something new for them. So aligning those processes the most we can, I think will be really helpful. So that's the request. I don't think it's an unreasonable request, and I'm not certainly asking for a deep, deep dive, but some dollar figures, design versus construction, get us in the ballpark, I think would be really helpful. Thank you.
This is not CASA related. Can I ask
Yeah,
a
I have
question?
one last comment on the previous matter then. I reject any notion that I wasn't and don't continue a supporter of the idea. I reject, though, that the process is ready for regular implementation until such a time as there is a plan that we see. We have a plan for everything. We have a 6-year plan. We work it all out in advance, and you see it, and you see it coming. And one last example, in 2013, I started a fight, and we got a project on Gamble Street to underground the power lines and widen slightly the sidewalk so people would stop dying on Gamble Street. It was approved and in the plan in 2017. And guess what? It was 2019, and then 2022, and then 2025. And guess what? It's just gone now. And so without a plan, you can't prove. Without a plan, you can't make sure equity happens. Without a plan, it's just the pet projects of a set of people who have the ear of the people who are able to get the thing moving. And that is the piece that I strongly emotionally respond to. It's not the proposal. I voted yes on the thing. I voted yes to put it on the ballot. And so I do reject the framing that I'm against these things. What I am against is government in the dark. And just because 3 or 4 people met doesn't mean it's been exposed and the light is on it and we know. This is where that happens. And we're being asked to adopt a budget that has a project in it for the 2nd year in a row. And so that's my sense, that's my feeling, even if a lot of advocates met in the corner and had a conversation and someone put it in their draft, that doesn't mean it was heard. And so that's the conversation I'm going to keep pushing until such time as it's in alignment with our accepted government practice of budgeting and planning. So that's where I'm going to end that. Ms. Braga, you have a new item.
I'm sorry, this was just a procedure question. And you may have told me at the beginning, but everything that's in this amendment book on the 19th, are we taking the vote on that? Or I'm just not sure. And then in the meantime, you may possibly decide to, can you just tell me the process from here? I'm sorry.
Through the chair to member Bronga, I apologize, Chair, if I say anything that is crosswise with the intent of how you plan to do things. But my intention is that we will take this amendment packet and any other conversations that have been had with membership, deliberate over which ones can be included, how we would include them if the mayor is supportive of including these, and then communicate back to you that those will be included, how they will be included and funded. If any of them are funded at a proportional level, we will ask if that's acceptable to you. And any that are not included, we will either communicate back to you as sponsors or to leadership to say these, these 8 are in and these 8 are not. And then the amendments that are out or not included in the S version would be the amendments that are moved on at the Tuesday meeting. So there's time for assembly leadership to plan with membership which ones are going to go and who goes first, et cetera, et cetera. And if there are any fund source changes within the S version, then I'm happy to have conversations with any amendment sponsors who are planning to run amendments on Tuesday, where the best fund source may come from or what the opportunities may be if you're really intent and believe that there is support for those amendments for passage.
So, but ultimately, the goal is to conclude all action on all of those like 8 items on the agenda by Tuesday, the 19th. It has to be by the end of the month, but our goal is to get it done by the 19th. And so the public hearings are closed. We've done 2 public hearings, all the process. So, and we anticipate Friday, you'll see the S version. And then Monday conversations with folks, probably more wholesome, and then Tuesday action. That's where we are. Any other questions on process? Any other questions at all? Thank you, everybody. I do have one last question. Who is ultimately responsible for writing HERD on that very sensitive topic we just discussed?